Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Bills Guys, presented by the Buffalo Fanatics Podcasting Network. We are no longer a podcast. We are a vidcast or a vodcast or a podio, whatever you want to call it. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis. I am joined, as always, by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. We have a loaded show for you guys today. We are talking ESPN once again, dissing our main man, our quarterback, Josh Allen. We're going to talk about some of the coaching staff comments. We're going to take questions and topics from you guys and a whole bunch of stuff. But first of all, Dave, it's super important that we need to mention this. 67 days until Buffalo Bills football is back.
Yeah, another mini milestone here. The 7 drops to a 6. So we're getting close to that sort of 2-month period there, right? Like getting down to the 60 days. You're talking about just over 2 months. And yeah, I mean, we talk about this kind of at the open of every show, but you know, it seems like it's all the things are moving in the right direction right now as far as reopenings of facilities and the NFL allowing players and coaches to kind of have certain like guidelines into coming back into the facilities.
Coaches are actually back today.
They're back.
They're back. They released the guidelines for players to come back.
Yes. So that's great steps in the right direction. And, you know, the one thing that just makes you a little nervous is like you've seen like a slight increase in the cases in a lot of the areas, especially here where I am in North Carolina. There's been a spike. I think we had the second most cases over this last week in the country. So you hope that doesn't cause any delays and also honestly longer term ramifications, right, of this becoming like a longer lockdown. So
well, here's the kicker here. The World Health Organization, I know Donald Trump pulled us out of the World Health Organization, but the World Health Organization came out today and said that asymptomatic carriers, people who have the coronavirus but aren't showing any symptoms, are at a very, very minimal risk from actually spreading the disease, which is a complete 180 from where they were when this whole coronavirus epidemic started. So it sort of shows you how sort of just the way these sort of things you change as you sort of get more familiar with the virus and more research is done, because it was a strain that people had never seen before. So if that is true, if that statement holds up as a fact, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, training camps start rolling exactly on time and that we see fans in the stands in August and September, because if asymptomatic people aren't showing any or aren't transmitting this disease, it's as simple as sick people stay home. And if you're not sick, go about living your daily life. So it should be interesting to see if that sort of study or statement holds up over time, because that would mean outdoor football. Fans.
I mean, that's the thing. As long as that holds up, right? These things have kind of gone on the 180 multiple times now on different topics around COVID. So you just hope that you're right as they learn more about it and as they get more information, test more people, learn more, have more time to do research, that the further we go along, the more accurate these types of proclamations are and scientifically are proven out. So fingers crossed. Let's hope for the best.
Oh, yeah. All right. So before we get started today, we want to shout out our super chatters. You guys are all mentioned at the bottom. About once a month, we'll be doing a giveaway from anyone who super chats. So you have a chance to win some Buffalo Fanatics gear. Share with us, DM us your Twitter handles. We'll share your social media accounts so people can go find you and follow you on social media. We appreciate our super chatters. Whenever you guys donate to the Buffalo Fanatics, that money goes straight back into Fanatics, pays for all the fancy things like these backdrops and these graphics. So we really do appreciate the super chatters. Guys will get priorities when you comment in the comment section. And even if you're not a super chatter, we do have another great deal for you before we jump into our first topic today. Whoops. There we go. We got the Buffalo Fanatics Fan Shop. If you guys are looking for Bills gear, head over to bffanshop.com. You got Mr. Process, you got your Dig, you have the Motor and Moss M&M shirts. 10% off your purchase if you use the promo code The Bills Guys. And there's even some fancy new, you can't really see it here, Bills
You gotta
Guys
stand up,
shirt.
man. Stand up and show them the shirt.
I don't know how high I can stand up, but
There you
Bills
go.
Guys shirts kind of looks like a Cubs shirt from a distance in the Buffalo Fanatics fan shop. So head over to the BF fan shop if you're interested in getting some new Bills gear. 10% off on us, the Bills Guys. Use the promo code Bills Guys. That's BILLSGUYS. All right, let's start talking football, Dave. And the biggest thing, we're at about 100 live viewers now, so I think it's important we jump into this right away. ESPN is really going at Josh Allen again, and they're not by name. They're not going after him, but I feel our quarterback is being slighted. And what ESPN did today, they dropped this bomb on Twitter this morning when they dropped this article. I got super heated on Twitter this morning. I said this is going to be a fiery show today. I said I wasn't going to rant until the season starts, but I might have to rant. Because what ESPN did was, and the instructions are right here, was they wrote an article, or they did a draft of sorts, a 4-round draft where they put every single player in the National Football League into a draft pool. And they had the reporters from each team draft 4 players. So Marcel Louis-Jacques for ESPN was picking for the Bills. My beef is not with Marcel. He actually had a pretty solid draft. But here were the guidelines they had to follow with every single player in the National Football League in their draft pool. Every current NFL player was available. Salary caps don't matter, but you're only drafting for 4 rounds. In those 4 picks, each pretend GM had to select a quarterback, a non-quarterback offensive player, and a defensive player. The 4th pick could be whatever they wanted. Some people legitimately took a kicker. I don't know why, but they did. Yep. They used the 2020 NFL draft order with the traded picks reversed and going back to the original teams, and it was a snake draft format, so it reversed into the second round.
Fantasy football style draft there, more so there.
And the other 20 starters on each team were going to be sort of just average NFL players. They said analytically, if it's an offensive lineman, think of like a Donovan Smith. If it's an edge rusher, think of like a Harold Landry. If it's a cornerback, think of like a Malcolm Butler. So everyone else on your roster, except for these 4 guys you take, are just going to be average NFL players. Just like when you think of average, those are the players that fill out the rest of your roster. Each team was given this guideline or this goal: try to win the Super Bowl within 5 years. That was the guideline given to them when they drafted. And this is the first round that these people had the audacity to come up with. You'll notice I have a lot of highlighting on here. There are a lot of things I can agree with. Patrick Mahomes going number 1, Russell Wilson going number 2, Lamar Jackson 3, Deshaun Watson 4, whatever. For the life of me, how is any pick in the top 10 any position but a quarterback? How is it that there are 40-year-old quarterbacks in Drew Brees and Tom Brady in the top 15? You have Drew Lock going to the team that drafted him at 15th overall, ahead of Kyler Murray at 17 to Dallas. You have quarterbacks like Teddy Bridgewater, Jimmy Garoppolo, Ryan Tannehill, Tua Tagovailoa at 44 overall. Justin Herbert went 1 pick after Josh Allen. I'm sorry, but that's just insulting. So even though they didn't say it by name, there was some legitimate shade thrown at Josh Allen with this sort of draft that they threw out there. There were other names I could have highlighted, but they aren't as inflammatory like Baker and Sam Darnold. But what are your thoughts here? Am I reading too much into this, or is this a slight at our quarterback not having Josh Allen in the first round of this draft?
I mean, it is a slight, but I feel like there's also some context we need to put behind this, right? Is that each team, like, it wasn't one person drafting this entire, like, it wasn't like 1 or 2 people at ESPN drafting this entire thing, right? It was an individual person was drafting for that team in each slot. So what you see here a lot in a lot of these picks, or like, let's call out the Denver one with Drew Lock, right? Clearly, the Denver pick was made with some sort of affinity towards keeping the team, or at least kind of having the team look like what it actually looks like in real life, right? So things like that, taking Drew Lock at 15, it is a little bit weird though to me that like guys like Drew Lock are going to get picked ahead of, Josh Allen or even Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield, right? The things that don't make sense to me are like the ones that are really outlandish are like the LA Chargers taking Ronnie Stanley, right, at number 6. Like I don't understand that. But you're right. I think the point here being is that every team had to take a quarterback in this 4-round draft, and and knowing that for the quarterbacks not to be 9 or even 10 of the first 10 picks, I don't understand it. And then we talk about Josh Allen not getting picked until the 2nd round. It's just a little mind-boggling to me when you talk about guys like Drew Lock and Tannehill and Tua, and honestly, even Jimmy Garoppolo and Teddy Bridgewater getting picked before Josh Allen. Honestly, I love the guy, but even Matthew Stafford a little bit. I mean, if you're talking about trying to win the Super Bowl in the next 5 years, honestly, I probably would have picked Matthew Stafford over Ryan Tannehill. I would have picked Matthew Stafford over Drew Lock, right? You're talking about Drew Brees trying to win the quarter. Like clearly the team, Arizona, the guy that drafted for Arizona was thinking, I'm going to try to win the Super Bowl this year, right? Like he wasn't looking at it for 5 years. So some of those make sense. Some of those don't. But it's just one of those things where when you talk about Josh Allen, just another notch in his belt or feather in his cap of being disrespected, that's how we have been reading into these things, and it's ESPN is kind of the constant here, I feel like. Although PFF's like right there with him. So
Sam Dubs, we appreciate it, man. We appreciate you guys watching. We appreciate you guys just as much as you appreciate us. So thank you so much for that, Sam Dubs. But all right, I have a whole list and we're gonna go through it because I'm just peeved. So I apologize if I steal the microphone here. Breeze and Brady are pushing 40. So as you mentioned, if those, like the goal is to win the Super Bowl in 5 years, right? 5 years.
Yep.
If you don't do it in year 1, are they going to have an arm in year 2? Are they going to have an arm in year 3? They're going to be in a wheelchair by year 4. There's no way that those guys are going to be able to do it. You look at names like Bridgewater, Garoppolo, Tannehill, Drew Lock, as much as I hate it, I can understand. Because at least there's like some amount of potential and ceiling there. You saw what he did last year. But Teddy Bridgewater, Jimmy Garoppolo, Ryan Tannehill, you know what those guys are. Those guys are system quarterbacks. Those guys are game managers. If you only get 4 players, you only get to draft 4 players, and the rest of them are league average players. Can Teddy Bridgewater, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Ryan Tannehill take a league average team to a Super Bowl? Hell no, they can't. They're not taking any league average team to the Super Bowl. At least Josh Allen. I'm not saying he's there yet, but he's got the physical attributes and big playability to be a guy who carries the team, not just facilitates, but carries the team. So not taking Josh Allen above these game managers is just inconceivable to me. I know that Tannehill went undefeated or whatever last year in the regular season. I know that Teddy Bridgewater was the comeback player of the year. But those guys do not have the ceiling that Josh Allen does. They will need a hell of a lot more than league average players to get them to the Super Bowl. I don't hate Teddy Bridgewater as a quarterback. I don't hate Jimmy Garoppolo as a quarterback. I just can't fathom how you don't take the ceiling guy if the goal is to win the Super Bowl, because the rosters are league average. Tua hasn't played it down. He's got injury concerns, so you don't know what's going on with him. And all these teams that didn't take a quarterback in round 1 need to have their head checked. Let's take a look and see what all these teams who didn't draft a quarterback in round 1 did. Aaron Donald went to Miami. Their quarterback ended up being Kirk Cousins in round 3. That's okay because they got Zeke Elliott. The team went 6, LA Chargers, that took Ronnie Stanley. They took Zadarius Smith in round 2, ended up with Daniel Jones in round 3. I mean, come on. Like,
might have been the worst team. Chargers might have been the worst team I saw.
Oh, no. You haven't seen the Carolina Panthers yet, my friend.
I hear where you're going, but the Chargers, they're up there, man. They're pretty bad in this draft.
Joey Bosa and DeForest Buckner. That's scary. He went defense early. Kudos to him. But then his quarterback, the guy he thinks is going to take his team to the Super Bowl, Jarrett Stidham?
Okay, yeah, you got that.
Jarrett Stidham? And then he took Jedrick Wills in the 4th round, an offensive tackle, hasn't played it down. At least take a guy like Deion Dawkins, someone you know has played in this league and what he can do. I mean, for crying out loud. Justin Herbert is the starting quarterback for one of these teams. Went 1 pick after Josh Allen. Another team ended up with Phillip Rivers. Another team ended up with Big Ben. Another team ended up with Cam Newton, Tyrod Taylor. One team took George Kittle in the first round, end up with Jameis Winston as their starting quarterback. That is just straight disrespect to Josh Allen, that you're not going to take him in the first round. I get that all these players are good players and probably better players than Josh Allen. But if the goal is to win the Super Bowl, you ain't doing it with Jameis. You ain't doing it with Tyrod. You ain't doing it with Cam, and you don't even know if he can throw the football anymore. Same with Big Ben.
Mm-hmm.
Take the ceiling player in Josh Allen. Do not disrespect him just because he hasn't proven anything in this league. Like, just because, like, he's got the ceiling to do something. Respect the ceiling. They're not respecting the ceiling.
Did I misread, or did one of the teams take 2 quarterbacks? I'm pretty sure.
I didn't see a team take 2 quarterbacks.
Okay, maybe that was something.
That would have been super unwise if they did.
Yeah.
I know one team took a kicker.
Let's take a quick pause here and just recognize YPN 519 became a new YouTube member. So welcome, YPN 519. Glad to have you. Thank you so much.
And I'll tell you what, I'll give Marcel Louis-Jacques some credit. He had a pretty good draft. He got Michael Thomas in the first round. He got Josh Allen in the second round. Josh Allen in the second round, comparatively speaking, is tremendous value.
Great value.
And you have that big target guy that he can throw the football to. You get Matthew Judon, the pass rusher, in the third round, and then Micah Hyde, the safety, to play in the back half of that defense in the fourth round. So some immense, I think, a really good draft across the board for Marcel Louis-Jacques, yet he was still rated one of the worst drafts by Mike Clay.
Mike Clay gave it a tier 4. Yep, tier 4. So Mike Clay ended up rating all these teams on tier 1 through 4, 4 being the worst, and he gave the Bills a tier 4 grade, which is the worst.
You know what's the most interesting thing to me, with even with all the Josh Allen hate aside, is Marcel Louis-Jacques taking Micah Hyde over Tremaine Edmonds. Is that? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
This one's tough, right? Because if you're saying you're gonna try to win a Super Bowl in the next 5 years, you know, Tremaine Edmonds, a classic, 4-3 linebacker, but he's got that sideline to sideline speed, so he's a cornerstone piece on your defense. But if you're talking about, who's going to maybe make the more impactful plays in the back end, like maybe you're talking about leadership, like you're talking about Micah Hyde maybe being a team leader. I personally would have taken Edmonds, but I can understand with the fact that he went with Judon that maybe he was like, okay, well, Judon's kind of like an OLB type, pass rusher type. Maybe I'm not going to go with like 2 linebacker types, or 2 front 7 guys. I'm going to take 1 front 7 guy and 1 secondary guy. So I could kind of understand, based on the fact that he took Judon, that he went Hyde. Although, man, Judon and Edmonds would be quite the pair, I will say. And obviously Hyde's getting up there in age, so you're talking about a 5-year window. Could be Tremaine Edmonds' prime right here in these next 5 years, and the kid's still only, I think, 22 years old. So, it's a tough one.
I mean, these guys who were drafting had absolutely no issue taking quarterbacks with a ceiling. I really am surprised. Maybe it's just because it is Buffalo, and these reporters who follow other teams aren't really following the Buffalo Bills. But if you're going to go and you're going to take, Daniel Jones and Justin Herbert, you're going to take a chance on them, but you're not going to take a chance on a middle linebacker like Tremaine Edmonds. That shocked me a little bit. But I can't say I am surprised because, like I said, it is ESPN, and those reporters aren't familiar with the Buffalo Bills. Do we have any comments in the comment section? Anyone chiming in with their thoughts on these ESPN draft that went about this?
So, we talked about Darnold getting picked. That was one that we didn't necessarily have a huge issue with. But again, like we've had this debate a few times now, right? It's like, you hone in on the AFC East here and you really concentrate on the quarterbacks in the AFC East. Darnold picked 3rd overall, Allen 7th. Like, does Darnold have that it factor that appears Josh Allen has to warrant him getting picked, 20 odd spots ahead of Josh in a draft like this? It's tough to say. Like, people are still banking on the fact that he's still super early in his career. And maybe that's also why they're kind of making the same counter argument against Josh, right? Like, it's still too early to tell. And they expect that Sam Darnold's sort of draft pedigree and, prowess at the college level at a big time program to eventually pan out and sort of exceed Josh Allen. So I do agree with Tony B's comment though there that, I mean, Josh Allen appears to have this it factor about him. But I don't know that Sam Darnold doesn't, I guess is the way I would put that. Cause I still think Sam Darnold is a really good prospect and has had, a little bit of a shaky start to his career, but he's been played pretty well at the tail end of last year. So I don't know that he doesn't have it, but I still would have taken Allen.
Yeah, Scott Devereaux said ESPN is trash outside the documentaries. I'm completely on board with that, Scott. I'll tell you what, the Last Dance was obviously great. I'm looking forward this weekend to Sammy Sosa versus Mark McGuire. But this is just the beginning of my war on ESPN because I can't believe that a network, like it should be easy, right? You run a 24-hour sports network. Like the job is not difficult. Sports sell themselves. Like ESPN just puts its own foot in its own mouth and puts itself in terrible situations on a daily basis. Like they spend so much money on all these unnecessary things and all these unnecessary personalities. Like this is my war on ESPN because it shouldn't be that hard to run a network like ESPN, yet they find a new way to mismanage it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
What does Nicholas got to say here?
So Nicholas says kind of along that it factor, topic there. I can agree that Darnold is maybe a more polished passer than Allen, but Allen is more of a threat due to rushing, coaching, better team around him. I will say that I do agree. I mean, the rushing, it's not even close. I mean, Darnold can run a little bit, but he's not in the same league as a Josh Allen when it comes to running. Coaching, I would agree as well. I mean, you could make the case that, the Bills have McDermott. He's a defensive-minded coach who we're counting more so on the offensive coordinator and Ken Dorsey in this situation to coach him up. Whereas a guy like Sam Darnold has Adam Gase there, who's supposed to be this kind of quarterback guy, and he's not, he's not shown that he can really be a head coach. So I agree with those comments. And what is Pierre here? What is Pierre saying here?
Well, he's saying here ratings have become king. It's hard to get ratings without controversy. And I can get totally behind that, Pierre, because what I forgot to say was I was going to preface this entire conversation with that we are falling exactly into the trap that ESPN wants us to fall into, where we're having this conversation and we're clicking on ESPN and we're doing all these things because it's so inflammatory. So he's got a point. There's a reason why Stephen A. Smith makes tens of millions of dollars a year. There's a reason why Skip Bayless does, but it doesn't make it okay.
No, but here's a counterpoint to that though, right? ESPN's trying to get clicks from their big markets mostly, right? Like if the Bills fans are on there, like they're not generating as many clicks or reads as people in the big markets. And maybe that's why, right? Maybe they're saying Sam Darnold's the best quarterback in the AFC East or Tua is the best because you're talking about Miami and New York being big markets and they're going to get the fans of those teams to click on it. So maybe it's less so about hate on Josh Allen, more so about trying to get clicks from the big market teams and kind of like pumping up their guys. Maybe it's a little of both, but just playing devil's advocate a little bit.
Yeah, there. Scott and Dried Ocean made the comment about NFL Network and Good Morning Football. I absolutely love Good Morning Football. Like that show, I'll tell you what, like they're a homer, but they're a homer for every team. Kyle and Peter and Kay and Nate, they do an amazing job of actually understanding every single team. Like they're
very unbiased. Yeah,
they're unbiased. Maybe they pat teams on the back too much. Maybe they give teams too much credit. Maybe they're unwilling to criticize some teams. But at the same time, when they're talking about the Detroit Lions, they're just as knowledgeable as when they're talking about the Buffalo Bills. When they're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, they're just as knowledgeable as when they're talking about the Los Angeles Chargers. And they give all of the teams, like when you turn on Skip and Shannon, on the day after Thanksgiving, it was Dallas Cowboys for the first 45 minutes before a single Bills player, a single Bills coach, the word Bills even came out of Skipper Shannon's mouth. Whereas when you turned on Good Morning Football, they were actually having legitimate conversations. They were engaging the viewers. There was humor to it. They were showing like the Josh Allen, dive play. They were doing all of these things and having a conversation that hooked people and intrigue people without having it be all about just the Dallas Cowboys, which is something I really respect and appreciate with that Good Morning Football crew. They deserve a bigger platform than NFL Network. They should definitely be out in front of a wider audience.
Yeah, I agree. And, we get love from them. Obviously, Schrager gives us love. Nate's given us love in the past. So, maybe we have a little bit of bias towards them. But I think even bias aside, I still think they have a more polished and well-rounded show. And they definitely they're a little bit more equal opportunity with the teams they cover and kind of the assessment. So, yeah, I agree with Corey.
One member of not so much Good Morning Football. He's on Good Morning Football a lot, but he's an NFL Network personality. Michael Robinson he's big into the Bills, but he made a pretty problematic statement a couple of weeks ago when he deemed himself the president of Bills Mafia. I think Mr. Del Reed is going to want to have a conversation with Mr. Robinson there. He kind of put his foot in his mouth, but I always appreciate NFL Network and the comments they bring. I really like that comment that you had up there earlier from
Mike.
Who was it? Mike? Yeah. No need to question ourselves, guys. We know what we have on paper and on the field. ESPN can go talk about Dallas and New England. We all know who will get the last laugh. Just wait. And that's a perfect segue, Mike, because I want to turn now to some conversations that the Bills coaching staff had with the media last week. The media met with Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier, Heath Farwell, Brian Dable. They all met with the media over the course of the last week, and there were some comments that I want to talk about. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk to you guys real quick about the Flick Chat app. Seriously, right now, pull out your phone. If you're not watching this on your phone, pull out your phone, go to chatwithbf.com. It's download this app called Flick Chat on the App Store, on the Google Play Store. It is like the Buffalo Bills message boards of old, Twitter, Instagram, all rolled into one. If you go to chatwithbf.com, you can join the Buffalo Fanatics channel within the Flick Chat app. And if you're getting sick of Twitter, if you're getting sick of the politics, like it's just not your thing, it's not something you want to see streaming. You just want a place where you go and it's just Bills takes all the time with fellow fanatics like yourself. Well, Flick Chat is the place to be. So download that app, get on Flick Chat. There's over 1,000 Bills fans just like yourself on there. If you're on the Flick Chat app already, hit us up in the comments section. We'll shout you out. But join that Flick Chat app and chatwithbf.com. And you can have all of your Bills Mafia conversations. I'm there. You're there. Pierre is there. Rico is there. You can have a chat. Bobby is there. You can have a chat with all of your favorite Buffalo Fanatics personalities and fellow fanatics like yourself. All right. The coaching staff comment. Sean McDermott is the first one up. He had a lot of interesting things to say. Football related, he had one really interesting comment. This is, I'm going to credit Nick Bat on Twitter, Nick Batalana of the Nick and Nolan Show. He's the one who tweeted this. I retweeted it. I didn't actually hear the full context of the quote, but this is what he had to say about it. Bills coaches having ongoing discussions to set reasonable expectations internally about what they can realistically get from rookies and free agents if they get only 6 weeks of training camp and preseason. So they're already having conversations internally about how much they can realistically get out of rookies and free agents. What does that say to you? Like, should we not be expecting a whole lot from our rookies like Zach Moss and AJ Epinesa, from some of our free agent additions like Mario Addison or Josh Norman? Or is this maybe just a little bit of coach speak here?
I think it's coach speak to an extent, because if you think about, let's start with the free agents, right? You've got guys like Mario Addison, guys like Josh Norman. These are players that have been around the NFL. These are guys that are over 30 years old. They've played in McDermott's system. They know the system. I'm not at all worried about guys like that, right? Addison's going to come in. Norman's going to come in. They're going to be fine. Even guys like Matakevich, who's like a special teams guy, like it's going to be fine for these guys. I think free agency wise, I mean, the only guy that there was like a real lack of familiarity with was Matakevich, right? Yes, you worry about Stephon Diggs as a free agent, but he's been in contacts with the coaches. We saw him in the practice in Florida with Josh Allen and the guys. So, and again, he's a professional as well. He's a veteran. So to me, the question comes down to more about the expectations of the rookies and specifically more of the later round guys, because I think, we heard McDermott in the past make the comment around like, we don't we don't need Epinesa to come in and be a starter from day one. He can work himself in. He can be a backup to start the year and eventually kind of down the road, make his impact. So to me, that's fine for what you're getting out of him. To me, like the guys I would be worried about the most as far as like maybe setting unreasonable expectations are the receivers. I think that you talk about Gabe Davis and Isaiah Hodgins, and you talk about this wide receiver battle that is going to happen during camp. And I think it hurts these guys a little bit. Now, Gabe Davis is going to make the team because he's a 4th round pick, but they may not be as polished or as ready to go from day one as maybe we were going to hope for. We know receiver has been talked about a lot as being one of the harder positions to transition to. Now, there obviously are exceptions. We saw guys like A.J. Brown last year and Deebo Samuel make immediate impacts. DK Metcalf made some, impact down the stretch as well. So the hope is not all lost, I will say, right? And then the big one, right, other than Epinesa, is what is Zach Moss going to do for you? Because he's going to have to come in and contribute from day one. The Bills need 2 running backs. Maybe TJ Olden's that guy early on, super early, but I think the coaching staff is going to have high expectations for Zach Moss. And by all accounts, this guy's a football guy through and through. So the fact that we've seen through the interviews and how coaches have talked about him and his coach at Utah talk about how much of a football guy he is, that's going to be a benefit to him, even though it may be an abbreviated camp. So for me, my biggest focus is going to be on those 2 rookie receivers, I think, coming in and what they're going to be able to do.
Yeah, I really like the comment from Mike here. He says, my personal opinion, we play the starters in the 4th preseason game and give all the rookies the first 3 games. I think you might see somewhat of a version of that. I think you might see that like games 1 and 2 and 4. And then game 3 is where you would see the starters because that's traditionally where you see them. But I'm with you on the 3 and 1 approach. But the other thing you have to worry about is game shape, soft tissue injuries, things like that. You want the guys out there sort of mimicking the playing style. I know Sean McDermott has said before, like, I want the guys to get prepared in the locker room like they would for a game. I want the guys to walk out the tunnel like they do for a game. I want them to warm up like they do for a game. I want them to come out after halftime. Like all of these things, like Sean McDermott is so much about putting yourself in that mindset, putting yourself there, even if it's just practice. So he wants to mimic that sort of game play as much as possible. So I don't know how much of that we would see, but I don't hate the idea, Mike. I just don't know if Sean McDermott is wired that way. Heather commented, how will the shortened preseason going to impact the bubble players? And I really like that comment too, because there's some guys in the back half of our roster that I like. Tyrell Dodson, Trey Adams, Dane Jackson, our 7th round pick, Tyler Bass, the kicker we drafted. There are a ton of players in the back half of this roster that have a shot of making it. But if the Buffalo Bills in a shortened season don't feel comfortable, maybe they keep I'm sorry, who's that guard we signed from Miami? I'm blanking. Maybe we keep Evan Bain over Trey Adams, or maybe we keep Ryan Bates over Trey Adams because he's been in the system longer. Maybe we keep some of these players. A name I have highlighted here when I saw this quote was Trent Murphy. Maybe Trent Murphy was going to be a cap casualty. Maybe they had these big plans for guys like Quentin Jefferson. Maybe they really wanted to come into training camp and give Darryl Johnson every opportunity to become a legitimate player. Maybe they had all those intentions. Now there's a shortened off season. Is this Trent Murphy's lifeboat here? Is this his way to stick on the football team at least through the expiration of his contract through the season? So yeah, it's crazy to think about. But at the end of the day. And this is a good question here a good comment here from YPN. I have a good feeling about Dane Jackson. I think we might see the Matt Milano, Levi Wallace effect this season. I made this comment a couple of weeks ago. When Matt Milano was drafted in the 5th round, he was sort of an undersized linebacker. He had to bulk up a little bit. When Levi Wallace came from Alabama, he didn't have all the physical attributes that you look for in an NFL player. That's why he was a 5th round pick. That's why he was a UDFA. Despite the fact that Matt Milano, a lot of fans were like, get that 5th round pick on the field. Despite the fact that fans were like, throw Levi Wallace out there. Who cares? He came from a sweet college program in Alabama that won all the time, and Philip Gaines is getting burned every week. Despite the fact that the fans were clamoring for Philip Gaines, not EJ Gaines, and Ramon Humber to be gone, the Bills waited and waited and waited. And it wasn't until weeks 8 or 9 that you saw Milano and guys like
Mhm.
Levi Wallace get the run that fans wanted. The Buffalo Bills wanted them in practice for 7, 8, 9 weeks before they were comfortable putting them on the field. So as much as I think it is coach speak, I think there might be some truth to it. Like AJ Epinesa might be a role player for the first 8 weeks. Zach
Yep.
Moss might just be Frank Gore for the first 8 weeks. Trent Murphy might be safe on this roster. At least for the first half of the season. All of these things might happen despite the fact that we don't want it and despite the fact that the coaching staff didn't intend for it to happen. Circumstances just is sort of brought that about.
Yeah, and Tony B makes a comment here about Gabe Davis. He's going to be sneaky good, big, smart, and catches everything. And I think that you and I both like Gabe Davis's potential here, him being more of a straight line guy now. But you mentioned it on a prior show of like, okay, even if he is a straight line guy right off the bat, and you play maybe throw him in the slot, end of half, end of game, wherever, and all of a sudden now you have 3 guys that can go deep between Brown, Davis, and Diggs. And, he might not have to learn a whole lot of new routes to be able to contribute early on, and maybe that's something that sort of helps him out. Knowing that that's kind of his thing right now, maybe that's a situation where he can use sort of like the early part of the season, the middle part of the season to develop the rest of his route tree, and it's not going to be a huge detriment.
Yeah, and the vertical shots, like vertical shots from the slot, is what I'm excited about for Gabe Davis. So you have Stephon Diggs and John Brown on the outside, 2 guys who can beat you deep, 2 receivers who have proven themselves in this league. You put Gabe Davis in the slot and run a vertical, he could be matched one-on-one with a linebacker. He could be matched one-on-one with a safety. You don't know the sort of matchups you're going to get, but Gabe Davis, who's really good at stacking defenders and getting open at the second level, if Josh Allen can start connecting on that deep ball, Gabe Davis, if he's on the field in 3 wide receiver sets with those other 2 guys, can find himself in some really some really good, some really great opportunities down the field because the safety's eyes, the corner's eyes are all going to be on Diggs and Brown.
So we've had a couple comments coming in. A couple people have commented on Trent Murphy in the last couple minutes. So we've got Mike's commented on Trent Murphy. We've had James Parson comment on Trent Murphy. Now Daniel as well commenting on Trent Murphy. So these are all 3 of these guys have kind of come to bat for Trent Murphy. So what do you think about Trent Murphy at this stage? I mean, clearly I think this abbreviated offseason has to help him, like you mentioned, but does it ensure that he makes the final roster at this point? What do you think?
He says Epinesa was not drafted to replace Trent in 2020. He was drafted to replace Shaq Lawson. I don't think the Bills had any intention of drafting AJ Epinesa whatsoever. I think Quentin Jefferson was the guy they envisioned replacing a Shaq Lawson. I think AJ Epinesa just happened to fall into the Buffalo Bills' lap, and he was so good they couldn't pass on him. I think the Bills had their eyes on Kyle Duggar. I think the Bills had their eyes on a couple other players. And it just so happened to like, man, we can't pass on a guy who we probably would have taken at 22 if we still had a first-round pick. So AJ Epinesa is the wild card. Everyone expects him to be a starter. Everyone expects him to replace Trent. You're on the money where I think it's going to be Quentin Jefferson and AJ Epinesa sort of duking it out to fill in that Shaq Lawson role. And I think that Trent Murphy is going to be given a chance to ride out that final year of the contract. I think the Bills are in absolute win now mode, and this is a guy who's been in the system for 2 years. Maybe his snaps can be even more limited than they were with the addition of AJ Epinesa and Quentin Jefferson and Mario Addison to a point where he can be super effective because when he's out there, he's just going full bore and just like not holding anything back when he's out there. And our defensive line is deep. When those guys are out in the field, they better be just giving it 180% because there's absolutely, they're all going to be rested. And no one's going to be playing more than 50% of the snaps a game, I don't think. Maybe at Oliver. But, those guys better be full bore, pin their ears back, rocking and rolling on the defensive line because they are so, so deep. But I'm with the people who think that Trent Murphy's job is safer than a lot of us probably assume.
All right, so who's next on the coaching interview list here?
All right, I have Sean McDermott again, actually, and this is a comment he made. It was sort of restated by our boy Bradley Gelber over at West Her and the Bills Wire. He says McDermott mentioned Feliciano, John Brown and Cole Beasley and Andre Roberts as good veteran leaders in the room. Don't typically get that from the wide receiver room, and they have multiple. The thing that stuck out to me here was the fact that he called Andre Roberts a leader in the locker room. And we know how much Sean McDermott loves his leaders. So Andre Roberts, roster lock?
I mean, yeah, I think so. Look, we both thought he was a lock, even before this, but you think about a guy like Andre Roberts, he's played on a lot of teams. He's never been like, a true, gamer as receiver. I think he probably had his best season with the Cardinals, if I'm not mistaken, as far as receptions. But this is a guy that's had to cut his NFL career playing special teams as a return guy. And he finally kind of made it, with the Jets, and he made that all-pro season. I think he's a guy that McDermott respects a lot for sort of what he does on the field. Like, he's not the flashiest guy. He does what he needs to do to contribute, and he's a really good return man. I mean, we talked about some of the stats he had. He was like 4th in the NFL in return yards, even missing 3 games. I believe that was kick return yards. So that was last year. So to me, Andre Roberts is a guy that you can count on. He's got great ball security. He was hampered a little bit early in the season last year by some, quad injuries. So I think he's a lock. And I think that until there's someone else that steps up and shows they can contribute in the return game, and give the coaching staff that sense of security, then he's a lock, because you're only paying him $2 million or whatever it is this year, and it's his last year on his deal. So it's like it's cheap to have him on the team. You're not really missing out. So quick shout out here to Mike Shabby for being a super chatter here. Thank you for the donation, Mike. We really appreciate it.
He's one of the MVPs today, because he's been hitting up that comment section. People in the comment section, got to step up your game, because Mike's been killing it today. So
Mike's had a lot of good comments. Now, we've had a lot of good comments, but Mike's been hitting it today. So thanks, Mike. We really appreciate it. So where do you come out on this Andre Roberts thing?
I'll tell you what. I think he's a roster lock. Somebody mentioned earlier about Isaiah Hodgins. Like, what role do you envision Isaiah Hodgins playing? I really think it's going to come down to the Bills deciding whether they want to keep 6 wide receivers or 7 wide receivers. If they keep 7, Roberts is a lock for sure. I think even if they keep 6, Roberts is a lock for sure. I think if they keep 7, Isaiah McKenzie's safe. If they keep 6, Isaiah McKenzie's gone. Because I think Isaiah Hodgins and Duke Williams, one of them is going to get to play the big slot role. Me and one of my favorite followers on Twitter, a guy named Merck.
Merck's funny. He's a funny follow.
Always has great things to say. He was talking about how the Bills are just adding speed and speed and speed to their wide receiver core. Or no, I'm sorry. He was talking about how Josh Allen, one of the biggest things he needs to work on besides the deep ball is throwing with anticipation. And I commented back, like, one of the reasons why the Buffalo Bills went so heavy on speed with Beasley and his route running ability, and his ability to separate, and John Brown and Gabe Davis, all of these players, is because of their ability to separate, because Josh Allen likes to throw to a guy who's already open. He doesn't so much like to lead his receivers. So you're going to want to have as many of those speed guys as possible on the roster. Andre Roberts fits into that mold, even though he's a return man. But I still think they're going to want one that big contested catch guys like Isaiah Hodgins. But the intriguing thing to me, because I'm sort of mumbling on here, and I apologize, I kind of lost myself in my train of thought, because I really wanted to get to this point, and I was getting ahead of myself. 2 names he didn't mention when he talked about leaders in the locker room. 2 names that he's mentioned before as leaders in the locker room. 2 guys that we associate with being those glue guys, those locker room guys. 2 guys that, if we cut one of them, might make space for a 7th wide receiver on the roster. Didn't hear Patrick DeMarco's name. Didn't hear Lee Smith's name. So those are guys who have typically been glue guys, have typically been culture guys, have typically been the first name out of Sean McDermott's mouth when he talks about leaders in the locker room, when he talks about culture. And their names were not mentioned. So if we can cut a Patrick DeMarco, cross-train a Tommy Sweeney, if we can cut a Lee Smith and only keep 3 tight ends, because Tommy Sweeney steps up his game.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing.
It's an easy path for Andre Roberts. It's 7 receivers.
And I think it's an easy path to cut Lee Smith if that happens, because like let's be honest here, they signed Lee Smith last year, right? It wasn't like he's been a guy that's been there since the beginning of the McDermott Bean era, right? So DeMarco is though, however, right? DeMarco was one of the first signings they made. He's been on the team for a couple of years already. He's made a lot of money, playing a very pretty much a special teams type role and going deep in playoff games. So it's a little just a little comment there, but look, I would love to see Sweeney kind of take that step and like allow us to a little bit more flexibility with the roster. So a little telling. I would have expected maybe him to mention DeMarco before Lee Smith, but the fact that he didn't mention DeMarco at all is also could be a little telling.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we got two comments here, and they sort of build off one another. Ben Johnson says, yeah, Roberts is a Pro Bowl return guy. And then Andrew Miller says, McKenzie can go back there and fair catch punts all day, watch kickoffs go through the end zone while giving you more on offense than Roberts. Here's the thing, Andrew. I don't think Sean McDermott agrees with you, because you saw last year at the beginning of the season when Andre Roberts had that hamstring injury. They tried putting Isaiah McKenzie back there. He muffed the punt. So who they put back there? They put it back there, Micah Hyde, who is a punt catcher. He's not a punt returner. He's a punt catcher. So Sean McDermott clearly doesn't trust Isaiah McKenzie back there. Like, Isaiah McKenzie isn't even option 2. He's option 3 or 4 behind guys like Micah Hyde. And I just said Micah Hyde's name different in the last 2 sentences. I went from Micah to Micah. I keep saying it wrong. I can't spell names and I can't pronounce names, so I apologize. But Micah Hyde, he clearly trusts a punt catcher over Isaiah McKenzie. So as much as I want to agree with you, Andrew, because that's definitely my go-to move in Madden to make Isaiah McKenzie my return guy, not so much in reality, at least not in Sean McDermott's mind. So I think that Andre Roberts' job is pretty safe because, like Ben mentioned, he's a Pro Bowler. He was so close to popping off a big one last year, and Sean McDermott trusts his hands.
Corey, thanks for the donation, super chatter, Corey Buffalo. And an interesting comment here, right? Because we were talking about Sweeney a little bit. We talked about Lee Smith. What do we think about the tight end room? We'll take this. We'll take this one. I think that. Look, we talked about this a little bit, right? Like, I think ideally what I'd like to see is Knox and Croft on the field, right? As kind of the top two. Like, I want. One, I'm rooting for Croft because I think he's had a little bit of bad luck in his career when it comes to injury. And two, I think Knox is the guy that could be your all-around, do-it-all tight end if he has the chance to, develop a little bit more. We know that he didn't get a ton of run in college, right? He was very underutilized, didn't have a ton of catches, didn't catch his first touchdown, I think, until was it with the Bills, I think maybe was his first touchdown catch. Someone can fact check me on that one. But the thing is like Knox can be that number one. He can evolve into that number one, and Croft can be a very nice number 2 option as a receiving threat. Now, Croft's a decent blocker. He's not like the best, but if you have Knox and Croft on the field at the same time, it gives you options as an offense. So to me, if that's the case, and you think about a guy like Tommy Sweeney maybe being that third guy as a kind of like a more of a blocking type tight end, and then just kind of that short yardage type of guy, because Tommy Sweeney has great hands. I think that's one thing that people tend to forget about him, is that he actually has really good hands. That was one of the things that the draft analysts liked about him coming out, even though he didn't get a lot of run in that Boston College offense. So, Chris W mentions, what about Kroom? Like, Kroom's another one of those where it's like he's been on the team for a couple years. He's had some opportunity, obviously had that nice touchdown, wide open touchdown in that Vikings game 2 years back in Josh's rookie year. He's athletic and he's got ability. We've seen it from him in the preseason. We've seen it from a little bit on game day, but the room's very crowded. So Kroom's going to have to show that he can be more of an all-around guy this year, because I just feel like, they've invested in Knox. They want Croft, I think, in there. They've paid him, and they're probably going to keep him. So unless the Bills keep 4 tight ends, and Lee Smith, obviously, like, some of the comments have mentioned, and the coaching staff, likes him. It's going to be tough for this, for like the bottom of the tight end, group to crack this roster, whether that's like a Kroom or a Lee Smith or, whoever it is there at the bottom of the roster, it's going to be tough. Like, we're not like the Green Bay Packers. I don't think we're going to keep like 6 tight ends on the roster. So maybe I have higher hopes for like a guy like Sweeney than is realistic, but I kind of hope that Sweeney kind of develops. And we know Adam Nannini would like that Sweeney. So
yeah, I know. Steven here comments, Sweeney could be the sneaky tight end. I think Tommy Sweeney is the tight end that we should all have our eyes on in training camp and in the preseason in terms of roster construction. Because if Tommy Sweeney can sort of come back and have another training camp like he did last year and build off of it and prove to the Buffalo Bills coaching staff that he can be a willing and able blocker. He knows his assignments. He's not going to embarrass himself in that part of the game. He can play special teams, all of those things. Tyler Kroft's not coming off a broken foot anymore. Dawson Knox isn't coming off a bad hammy anymore. If Tommy Sweeney comes to training camp and does his job, it makes Lee Smith expendable. And once Lee Smith is expendable, then you're talking about, somebody mentioned Jason Kroom, who could be a speedier, taller, receiver-like tight end. Or you could talk about keeping an Isaiah McKenzie, a gadget guy. Or you could talk about keeping an Isaiah Hodgins or a Duke Williams, a big slot. So getting Lee Smith off this roster opens up so much for this offense, but it's up to Tommy Sweeney to prove to this coaching staff that he can handle tight end 3 roles. So for all the people out there who are Lee Smith haters, you need to be the biggest Tommy Sweeney fans as we head into training camp in the preseason, because the better Tommy Sweeney plays, the more likely a guy like Lee Smith is gone and a guy like Isaiah Hodgins or Isaiah McKenzie or Duke Williams are inserted into the roster, or even a Jason Kroom.
Yeah, and a good comment and observation here by Andrew. Sweeney showed well when everyone started beginning the preseason last year. Absolutely. I mean, we know Knox went down.
Dropped so late.
Yeah, some drops, but I mean, he was kind of like a preseason fan favorite there in a couple of those games. So, yeah, Tommy Sweeney, I'm rooting for him. If you get rid of Lee Smith, there's no one to back us up and make sure more space in the red zone. Yeah, I could kind of see that, unless a guy like Tommy Sweeney.
He's making a joke here. Back us up.
Oh, I thought he was talking about blocking. So misread him. Oh yeah. Well, there's a guaranteed holding penalty coming. Yes, if Tommy Sweeney's on the field. So
and I'll tell you, I'm doing a little research right now. I'm not done with it, but I've been going back and I've been watching Baker Mayfield rookie tape from when Freddie Kitchens took over as offensive coordinator, because I remember 2 years ago watching one of the analysts talk about what Freddie Kitchens was doing with that offense. And he mentioned like trips, wide receiver sets, having 3 wide receivers on one side of the field and utilizing play actions and all the things that it was doing to open up the offense for Lee Smith. So I've gone back and I'm watching a lot of Cleveland Brown, Freddie Kitchens tape from 2 years ago, not last year when he completely revamped the offense and they were terrible, but from 2 years ago when Baker Mayfield had a lot of success. And I'll tell you what, if we put Cole Beasley and John Brown and Stephon Diggs on one side of the field, and then you have a guy like Dawson Knox inline blocking on the other side of the field, and a guy like Devin Singletary coming out of the backfield, all the attention is on the 3 wide receivers over here. The number of just sheer dump-offs to David Njoku and to Duke Johnson that the Cleveland Browns just gained massive yards off of, because all the attention was over here, and those 2 guys were over here on linebackers and safeties, was insane. So I don't know if that's something Brian Daboll is considering, but the Buffalo Bills have the firepower on offense to use guys legitimately as decoys. Use Stephon Diggs, use John Brown, use Cole Beasley to hide Dawson Knox, to hide Devin Singletary, because we saw last year what Dawson Knox can do yards after the catch. He can bulldoze some people. We saw how Devin Singletary could make guys miss in the open field once he got to the second level. So that's something I'm studying right now. I'm trying to work up a video on, and it's something that really intrigues me. As much as we love Stephon Diggs and John Brown and Cole Beasley and want the balls in their hands, using them as decoys could be just as effective and can lead to big plays for guys like Dawson Knox in our tight end room and another guy in Devin Singletary out of the backfield.
All right, so let's open it up to questions. I guess
let's open it up.
We got this is a loaded question here, but I'm going to put it up there from Noah. What improvements do you guys want to see from Josh this year? Maybe we should just let Pierre answer this since he's already locked him in for his MVP. Locked him in for his MVP vote. So what improvements do I want to see from Josh this year? Look, a lot of people are going to make mention of the deep ball accuracy, so I'm not going to really talk about that as much. Obviously, that would be nice, but like one of the things that I want to see a little bit more, maybe from Josh this year, a little bit more of an improvement is using the running backs more as safety valves. I think in the passing game, I think Josh is he's really good at those like intermediate long type throws, those 15 to 20 yard throws, and he's really good when he takes off and runs the ball. But I also think that, you know, for his own health and for his own sort of development, right? Take some of these opportunities to get some easy completions to running backs, to guys like Singletary and Moss this year, and let them do the work after the catch, right? So I'm really curious to see if that ends up being part of the philosophy with Dayball this year as part of like offensive game planning. But I would like to see maybe where like plays are breaking down and he's like got that safety valve, that he maybe uses it a little bit more this year than maybe trying for like the huge, you know, the huge low percentage play. Not that he did that a ton, but like we really didn't use the running backs much in the passing game last year as much as we would have liked to see Singletary. So that's kind of what I would like to see.
And I'll tell you what, Noah, love the comment. Love the question. I'm not digging that avatar, man. You need a new avatar. You got to sit like Photoshop Stephon Diggs' head on there or something, but come on, no, we need an update there. But yeah, I'm with you. Corey apparently is with you. He says preach, tilt. Yeah. I'll tell you what. We have two running backs that can absolutely catch the ball in the backfield, that can do big things, that can make guys miss. Zach Moss utilized the words, make guys make business decisions. And to build off of that, I'm not going to say deep ball either, because I think deep ball is sort of the obvious.
It's overdone, right?
Yeah. One of the things I want to see I want to see two things. I want to see Josh Allen prove he can force feed the football to a star receiver. One of my favorite things about the Pittsburgh Steelers back in the day when they had Juju and they had, or even before that with Hines Ward and before that with Santonio Holmes, when they had AB, Ben Roethlisberger I legitimately made this comment all the time. Why don't they just throw the ball at Antonio Brown 25 times a game? Sometimes they would target Antonio Brown 20 times a game, or Le'Veon Bell. They would give him the ball 20, 25 times a game. They force-fed their stars the football because they knew their star players were the ones who make plays. My question for Josh Allen is, can you force feed a superstar? Can you keep Stephon Diggs healthy? That's something I'm really curious to see. That's something that's going to be worthwhile watching for the entire season. I hope he can. And I think one of the things that goes along with force feeding a superstar is throwing those contested catches. Not so much just a deep ball, but putting the ball in a place where the corner's there too. And you saw Josh Allen do it to Duke Williams in the end zone of that Houston game. He showed an ability. So whether it's we keep a bigger receiver, like an Isaiah Hodgins or a Duke Williams, whether it's throwing it to Dawson Knox, we saw that play he made at the goal line of the New England game, or whether it's throwing it to Stephon Diggs. Make some uncomfortable throws. Don't be afraid to turn the ball over. Don't turn into Tyrod. I don't want Tyrod 2.0. I don't want Josh Allen. He had 15 touchdowns this year, but only one interception. No. If you throw 15 picks, I don't give a damn if you're throwing 35 touchdowns. Take some risks, take some chances, have a little fitsy in you. Don't be a dumbass and throw it 300 yards over the receiver's head for an interception, but don't be afraid to make the tough throws. So I want to see him make the tough throws. I want to see him force feed the superstar. Do those things that winning quarterbacks do. Do those things that Super Bowl caliber quarterbacks do. And part of that goes along with what you said, and it's knowing when to dump the ball off, because what Tom Brady does better than anybody is instead of gaining 0 yards, he gets something. He's not afraid to death by 1,000 paper cuts you. So I'm with you, and I think my take sort of works in combination with that a little bit. Just sort of the intangibles that takes you over the top and turns you into an elite quarterback.
Got a good question here from Heather. Has our defense really improved its run D? Some of the runs last year were just killers. You remember that Philadelphia game? There were some brutal runs in that one. We will see. I mean, I think on paper, I would say yes. We've got guys that we've brought in, like Vernon Butler, who we expect big things out of to kind of fill in the Jordan Phillips role there. Harrison Phillips is coming back from injury. We've got guys like the guys we drafted, like Epinesa, are they're edge guys, but they're good run defenders. Quentin Jefferson is a guy that can play the run. Obviously, we're expecting a little bit of a jump from Ed Oliver. And Addison is a guy they brought in too, who can also play pretty well against run. So I would like to think our run D is going to be AJ Klein. I mean, Shaq Lawson, don't get me wrong, he was a great run defender, so he will be missed in that regard. But I do believe that we've got the replacements and the added horses on the line to still be pretty stout against the run. And obviously didn't even mention Starr because he's kind of the forgotten guy. Yeah. There's a lot of differing opinions on him, but I do think that we are deep enough and talented enough on the defensive line to have an improved run defense this year.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what, the thing that I'm going to keep my eye on is you mentioned a lot of really good players that should help the run defense. What I'm worried about is the rotation. Like, I'm worried about guys coming on and off the field so much. And when these guys are coming on and off, every once in a while, like, you don't get to get into that zone. You don't get to get comfortable. So if they're rotating too much, could that affect, the sort of comfortability of the players when they're on the field? So that's definitely something I want to keep an eye on, because the argument that I was making towards the end of last year was Ed Oliver needs to be on the field more. Like, he's making plays. I want him to make more plays, and he can't do that if he's not on the field more. So, I'm with you. I think the Bills have done what they need to do to address the line problem. The one thing to sort of play devil's advocate here, I'm going to keep my eye on how that rotation affects it, because players get in a rhythm, players get comfortable. We talk about quarterbacks and running backs and wide receivers. It's the same for every football player. So if these guys are coming on and off so much, it'll be interesting to see how that affects them. There was a really interesting question about the linebacker spot next to.
I'll go to that one. We'll come back to this one from Daniel. So there was a question, I think, who is going to be the starting linebacker next to Edmonds and Milano? And I would say, like, at least as of right now, it's probably AJ Klein, right? He's going to be the starting strong side linebacker to start the season. I've been kind of an AJ Klein hater on this show. We're paying him to be a starter, obviously, and he's going to have the trust of the coaching staff. He's been in the system too with McDermott in Carolina. So he's going to be the starter. My hopeful outlook is that eventually, depending on how he develops and where they best see him on the field, is like, I kind of want Voshon Joseph to be this guy, honestly. I know there's some differing opinions on Voshon. He could be a weak side guy maybe, or a strong side guy, but I'd love to see him kind of fill that role maybe down the line.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned this a few times now, but Lorenzo Alexander's gone, and that's going to open up sort of a can of worms for this Buffalo Bills defense. Like, where do they go from here? Because Lorenzo Alexander was such a unique football player, where he had the ability to defend the run. He had the ability to drop back into coverage. He could literally do it all. And he was very good at all of it. So the Bills find themselves in a weird situation here, where they can just try to replace Lorenzo Alexander with multiple people. They can try to replace Lorenzo Alexander with one person. They can try to make a philosophical change to their defense. And so I think it's going to be a lot of experimenting with the Buffalo Bills. And a lot of the questions are going to be, how comfortable are they experimenting in such a shortened offseason? Because one way you can look at it is, all right, just plug and play AJ Klein, and on passing downs, bring in Saran Neal and Dean Marlowe or Teron Johnson, one of your nickel guys. Another option to go would be to go to a defense that plays nickel almost exclusively. Hardly ever play three linebackers. Go almost exclusively to a nickel defense. We've seen some other defenses do that. Keep Saran Neal or Teron Johnson or Dean Marlowe in, depending on who the slot receiver is. If it's a tight end, it's Neal or Marlowe. If it's a bigger slot, it's Neal or Marlowe. If it's a tinier guy, it's Teron Johnson. That's one route. Another route that they can go, which I don't know if they're going to do that because of the shortened off season, is making Voshon Joseph your big nickel. Can he replace? Can he be like a Shaq Thompson or a Thomas Davis and give you that third linebacker? Obviously AJ Klein's going to be the starter from the start, but Voshon Joseph showed in college he can drop back into coverage and he can rush the passer. He's got a little bit of a thin frame. But it'll be really interesting to see if the Bills maybe use that approach where they just play two weak side linebackers. But that shortened – I'm going to come back again to that shortened off season. Will there be time to make that philosophical adjustment, or is it something that we might not see till like mid-season?
Yeah. So here's a question from GH Falcons. I actually think I know this person. I went to high school with him. I think he commented in the section. So, hey, what's up, Colin? Thanks for the question. How will no fans potentially impact the team? We have a great home field advantage. I think it's maybe too early to say whether or not there's going to be no fans, right? But let's just hypothetically say if there are no fans, I do think it affects our home field advantage significantly, right? We're not the LA Chargers here. We're not the Jacksonville Jaguars. We rely a lot on home field advantage. It's a big deal for us. So I'm just going to pretend like this is not going to be an issue and that there's going to be fans in the stadium. And I don't even want to think about the the fact of no fans, but it could be, I would say it would be more detrimental to us than other teams. I think.
Well, it'll be interesting. If I'm accepting the premise of this question, I think the Bills still have some advantage as the season progresses. Like when some teams come in and, kickers have so much trouble anywhere on field with the wind, fans or no fans, same with some of the cold weather and the snow as the seasons progress. But, I'm going to digress there. It's what's really interesting to me. And with the announcement the World Health Organization made today, I'm starting to feel a little bit more confident that there will be fans in the stands in every NFL stadium. But it's going to be really interesting what the NFL decides to do if some states allow fans and others don't. Because they talk about fairness and equality in terms of letting players into practice facilities and practice time and all these things. But what if the Dallas Cowboys are allowed to have fans in their stadium and the Buffalo Bills aren't because they're in New York and one team's in Texas? What if none of the LA teams are allowed to have fans in their stands, but the Arizona Cardinals are? You know what I'm saying? So some teams have an even more of a home field advantage. So that's going to be something the NFL is really going to have to deal with, because we've mentioned this on shows previous. If there are no fans in the stands this year, the NFL loses $5 billion. $5 billion with a B in revenue with no fans in the stands. So even if they can recoup some of that, I think they're going to throw fairness out the window because they're just not going to care. They're going to want as much money.
Let me just appease Richard here for just a second. Bend my brim a little bit. Apparently, I will tell you, Richard. The reason I can't bend it too much is because I'm wearing glasses, and it's like it just doesn't work. So I hear you. I probably should bend it a little more. I appreciate that constructive criticism for sure. It's definitely noted. All right. We'll take one or two more here before we wrap up. Why don't you guys talk about Taron Johnson?
We hate him.
No.
We hate him, Muhammad.
I think we look, Taron Johnson, he's a guy that's done the most he can, I think, with the physical traits he has, right? The guy has no fear, and I certainly respect the way he plays the game. He's not afraid. He'll go in and mix it up with anyone. He made that nice play in the playoff game against Hopkins, questionable whether it was interference or not. But I think what's going to be interesting here is whether or not this nickel job becomes like a true competition between the likes of Taron Johnson, maybe a Dane Jackson, and even an EJ Gaines, right? So I like Taron Johnson. I think that obviously he's going to have the inside track for that job heading into the season. And obviously he's been there, right? So he's going to have the advantage. We talk about this shortened off season. He's the guy that's been there. I mean, EJ Gaines is a professional. He'll come in and know what he needs to do, but he'll have a leg up on a guy like a Dane Jackson for sure. So we'll see about Taron Johnson.
I mean, it comes out of this. I love Taron Johnson, the player. I think he's got some things to work on. We mentioned before, he's got a small stature and he plays a lot bigger than he is. And that means he gets hurt a lot, and I'm going to sound like, if anyone here listens to WGR 550, you hear Sal Capaccio say this about once a week, or at least he did when I used to listen to the station. I don't listen anymore. But Sal Capaccio would say every single time he was on the radio, especially when he was talking about like Sammy Watkins and stuff, being able to be on the field is really important to Sean McDermott. And Taron Johnson is consistently finding himself on the injury list. So if Taron Johnson can't get himself on the field, Sean McDermott's going to find himself a player that will stay on the field, because we've seen Taron Johnson coming off the field in games, mid-game, miss games a lot. a lot in his 2 years as the Buffalo Bill. And that's no knock on Taron Johnson because I do like him as a player. But you can't trust him to be out there if he's going to swing his body around like he's a player that's bigger than he is.
Mm-hmm.
You love the physicality. You love the aggressiveness. But it's hurting his ability to stay healthy. So Taron Johnson needs to find that happy medium where he can stay healthy and stay physical, but still be him. So I think he's still trying to figure that out, and I think he'll figure that out going into year 3, and hopefully secure his spot as the nickel defender.
I'm going to put Nicholas's comment up here because he's been persistent, and I'm going to reward him. He's copied and pasted this comment probably 5 or 6 times, and him and Daniel are having a nice back and forth in the comment section. So really quick, if I'm Brandon Beane and don't have a plan what to do with the money that I'm going to get if I cut Trent Murphy, I don't see us cutting him unless we have a plan to spend the $9 million on somebody. Do you agree? I say yes and no, just because like we're not strapped up against the cap right now as it is. I think we're somewhere around the neighborhood of like 20 to 22 million under the cap right now. So unless the Bills go out and they sign a Clowney or sign an Everson Griffin sort of out of left field with that, money that they could offset by cutting Trent Murphy. Let's say they cut Trent Murphy, save that 7-8 million, and they sign like a Griffin for like a 1 year, 12 million. A net 4 million more, like you're still not really strapped up against the cap. So the only way I see this really happening is if they do go out and get one of those sort of quote premier guys that are left out on the market.
And Corey with the actual Sal Capaccio quote in the comment section there, the best ability is availability. And that's been Taron Johnson this year. Nicholas, I'm going to be honest with you. We were skipping over because I'm just afraid of clowns, man. We're going to have to work.
That avatar is.
We're at the
I don't like clowns either. It's kind of scary. So,
but
I agree with you.
I will say this: one of the things I appreciate about Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott in this regime is they're not just thinking about the now; they're also thinking about the future. And you see this with all the free agents they've been signing. It's deals you can get out of after a year, deals you can get out of after 2 years. All these things, they're setting themselves up so when Trey White and Deion Dawkins and Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds and Josh Allen all become free agents, they can pay them. So the Bills are always thinking ahead. Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, they're always forward thinking. And that is my thought process with Trent Murphy. If they do decide to cut ties with Trent Murphy, if people legitimately beat him out, you can roll over that money into next year. That's $7 million that you can roll over into next year. At the end of every season, the next offseason, you can roll money over. So that's money you can roll over. So that's something to keep in mind as well for the future.
That's a funny comment. Plot twist, Nicholas is Brandon Beane.
Under the mask, it's just Brandon Beane.
That's great. I think that pretty much wraps it up. Let's see if we have any last minute questions here. All right, we'll throw this one up there. Do you guys have any YouTube tips? Can you put my comment on the screen? It looks cool. Yeah, there you go. YouTube tips, Steve. Why don't you got any tips for YouTube?
I'll tell you the one thing I'm working on is I'm working on not saying so much. So that's definitely one thing. I've since I started podcasting, since I started vidcasting, whatever you want to call it, I've started to really detest the word because I notice it now. I notice it when I speak. I notice it when other people speak. So, don't say just pause. It's awkward, but it's not an That's my suggestion. Just say nice things about the Bills. Say nice things about the Bills. Just say nice things.
All right. So I do feel bad. We do need to go back to one question. Daniel had a question and now I can't find it. So Daniel,
the O-line,
the O-line.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, it was O-line. Okay, so we'll talk. Any changes on the O-line?
I do not think so. I think the Bills are going to give Cody Ford every opportunity to be the right tackle. They've talked about the veteran leader that John Feliciano is. John Feliciano's got that history with Bobby Johnson. Mitch Morse is your center. Quentin Spain got that big money to be your left guard, and Deion Dawkins is obviously your left tackle. I think you could see a changing of the guard in terms of depth. Darrell Williams is going to be a right tackle, right guard flex. So he's your backup there behind Ford and behind Feliciano. That kicks Inseki over to being your backup left tackle. He also gives you that option at right tackle. I think that opens up some youngsters because you can have Ryan Bates, Ike Butker, Trey Adams, Brandon Walton, all of these guys can come in, and I think the addition of Darrell Williams makes guys like Spencer Long and Evan Bain makes them sort of expendable. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of these younger guys stepped up in the back half of the depth chart, we might cut a veteran or two more than people are expecting.
Yeah. So as far as changes, I think you might see changes to the overall group, but I would say as far as the starting group, you're probably going to see the same starting five that you saw going into last year, because they're going to give Ford a chance to keep that right tackle job. No, Corey Waddle is not on the team. He was not re-signed. He's probably going to be waiting around probably through camp to see if a team ends up needing to bring in a swing tackle. But I like LaAdrian Waddle, but I think that the signing of Darrell Williams was probably the writing on the wall for LaAdrian Waddle not coming back.
All right. Any final questions for the folks out there?
Pierre's just started the old MVP chant in the comments, so we've got about 8 million people now just chanting Josh for MVP. So there you go. He has taken over.
I'll tell you what, if you turn on ESPN, you won't be seeing those comments.
No.
Pierre, what we got to do to get you on ESPN, man? I know you're taking a hiatus from behind the camera. You were actually, Pierre, you were on ESPN, weren't you? Or was it NFL Network? Who took your video, Pierre?
I thought it was NFL Network, but I could be wrong.
Well, we're going to close it out. Oh, sorry.
Well, I hope Daniel's not mad that we waited so long to get to his question, but we got to it, so hopefully he forgives us.
Muhammad's been writing MVP so much that I keep clicking on it by accident. Daniel, smash that like button. We appreciate it, guys. We appreciate the likes. We appreciate the listens, the views. We appreciate the super chats. We got about 3 or 4 of them tonight. So it's always appreciated. Again, all that money goes right back into Fanatics. So thank you so much, guys. We will be back on Thursday, and we're saving one of our topics for Thursday that we were going to talk about tonight, but we didn't have a chance to get to because you guys had so many good questions. So we have an awesome topic for Thursday. It involves our stud middle linebacker, Tremaine Edmonds. So tune in for that on Thursday. Thank you guys so much. In the meantime, don't forget to check out Matt Perino's podcast on Wednesday. Rico will be there for the Buffalo Bills Super Pod, and then join us back here on Thursday. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one. Go Bills.
Go Bills.